evening. I want to welcome everyone tonight. My name is Sandy Chisholm, and I'm going to be your moderator tonight. But I want to welcome you first on behalf of ATFA, the American Turkish Friendship Association, and the Rumi Forum, who are sponsoring tonight's event. They have been doing these Abrahamic religion sessions for some time now, and I just want to applaud them for the work that they've been doing in the community. I think it's so important to grow education and understanding of the different religions here in the metropolitan area, as well as right here in Northern Virginia. I think it only builds more understanding and subsequent respect for all peoples within our community, and hopefully a better well-being for all. So tonight is one of those many, many sessions that ATFA and the Rumi Forum have been sponsoring. I want to thank Banner Kaplan from ATFA, and Mr. Rashid Talbas Alu. Where did he go? Right there, from the Rumi Forum. And I think there might be some other people here from leadership in both of those organizations. If you could stand. Well, I'm sure they're here. They're being shy, but thank you. Tonight's discussion is on welcoming the strangers, refugees and immigrants in our midst. Tonight, as I said, we'll be examining the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the texts, the writings, the tenets, the values that they address, and how they guide and provide some structure and guidance to the followers of those religions. We're not here tonight to discuss or debate local, state, or federal policy or regulations, but we're here to get a better understanding of how our Abrahamic religions teach and guide its followers to welcome the stranger and learn how our religions demonstrate and practice these values within the communities that we're present. To get the conversation started, I wanted to illustrate with numbers. I work for the government, remember, so we're all about numbers and statistics, so hang in there, don't get too bored with me. About the number of immigrants that are living here in the Washington metropolitan area, and even a few more statistics here on Fairfax County, since we are in Fairfax County tonight. We can best arrive at these numbers around the immigrant populations living in the metro area if we look at the number of people who actually speak languages other than English at home. And we can gather this information when we look at the U.S. Census Bureau data. In Washington, D.C., more than 1 out of 4 persons in the Washington, D.C. area speak a language other than English at home. Within Fairfax County, the percentage is 37.8, which is about 478,000, almost 479,000 people here living in Fairfax County speak a language other than English at home. Nationally, the number is only about 20.8, 21%. And get into a little bit more detail. Fairfax County languages other than English at home, for our Fairfax County Public Schools, it's almost 100,000 students in elementary schools speak a language other than English at home. Is the microphone too loud? Okay.
I think there's a mic in that thing that's giving it feedback.
Let's see.
I think there are 2 mics. There's one in there.
170 different languages are spoken in the homes of elementary school students in Fairfax County. I'm sure those of you who live in Fairfax County have heard that before. And one more last statistic, from the highest to the lowest, the countries that the people who speak languages other than English who live in Fairfax County: Spanish, Arabic, Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese, Urdu, people from India and Pakistan, Amharic from Ethiopia, Telugu from India, Farsi and Persian from Iran, Hindi from India, and how do you pronounce this? Tagalog from the Philippines and Manila. Thank you. The highest number of non-immigrants coming into the U.S. from 2006 to 2010, that was our latest stats, were from India, followed by Korea, and then followed by China. I'm sure some people thought that might be different. So tonight's speakers are Rabbi Gerry Serotta, Dr. Patricia Maloof, and Professor Naseem Rizvi. They will speak in the following order: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Each speaker will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll leave 15 minutes at the end for you to ask them questions. Each of you should have received a card, and we ask you to hold your questions until the end and write your questions on the card so that you can remember what they were from the very beginning. If we don't have enough time to answer all of the questions at the end, please bring them up to the front. We're going to ask the speakers to answer them later, and then we'll email them back to you should your particular question not be answered. I'm going to introduce each speaker individually as they come up and give you a short bio. So our first speaker tonight is Rabbi, may I call you Gerry rather than Gerald? Serotta. He's the Executive Director of the Interfaith Conference of Metropolitan Washington. Many of you refer to it as IFC. Prior to his position at the IFC, he was the founding Executive Director of the Clergy Beyond Borders. Rabbi Serotta formerly served as a university chaplain and Hillel rabbi for 28 years. For the last 20 years at George Washington University, where he was chair of the Board of Chaplains. He also served as president of the Association of Hillel and Jewish Campus Professionals. While on sabbatical, he held the position of senior rabbinic scholar in residence at the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, working on global issues and economic justice from the Jewish perspective. He also served at Temple Shalom in Chevy Chase and as their spiritual leader. So I would like to bring Gerry Serotta up to the podium. If you could give him a round of applause.
Thanks, Sandy. Part of the pleasure of being out here is to be able to work with you. You've been doing this wonderful interfaith work for so many years in this community, and I'm a neophyte. I've only been the executive director of the Interfaith Conference for 2 years, but you have a real treasure out in this part of our area in the country, in Sandy Chisholm. I hope you know that. And of course, it's wonderful to be with my fellow panelists and to be hosted here. I come whenever I'm asked to the mosque that's around the corner or here, if I can possibly come and work with you and work with the Rumi Forum, which is another institution that's deeply involved in interfaith relations in our community, throughout the country, in different local branches of it. And of course, trying to bring some healing to our brothers and sisters who live in Turkey, very much in need of that healing, and as is the entire region. And that is a society that's deeply connected to the issues we're speaking about tonight, namely immigrants. I'm going to speak really primarily about the Jewish tradition's perspective on the immigrant, the stranger, refugee. It's about the easiest thing you could ask me to speak about. I mean, one could say that all of my scriptures, the Torah in particular, is occupied with the story of immigrants and occupied with the situation of immigrants and strangers in our midst. I've brought some text. We may look at some of them if we have time, but scholars have noted that the phrase, you should care about the immigrant, the ger is the Hebrew word for it, because you were gerim in the land of Egypt. 36 times that particular phrase in various ways appears to remind the Jewish people as they're moving to create what would be an ideal society or the best society they could imagine once they return to the land of Canaan. 36 times they were reminded, you were slaves in Egypt, and you know the heart of the stranger. Your status in Egypt was non-citizen, not part of the majority culture. You were immigrants in Egypt, and you should remember that. You should remember what that experience was like. In fact, you could look much earlier, and here are the first two texts are part of the story. Who was the first immigrant or stranger in the Jewish scriptures was Ibrahim, or known to us as Abraham. Abraham was told by God to go to another land, to cross the river Euphrates and move to another land that God would show him and his family, and Sarai, his wife, become an immigrant. There's a place for you that it's important for you to connect to. So the first of the ancestors that we relate to as part of our specific Jewish history was an immigrant who had to leave his country and move to another land. So it starts with immigration. As I said, if you have the text in front of you, you see the promise and the projection to Abraham. Even though he managed to find his way into the land of Canaan, it was predicted to him that his descendants would end up in another country, and they would be strangers in a strange land that was not their land. And that's in fact what's happened in the biblical account. And when the Israelite people returned, by the way, the names Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew have some relevance to this story, because the Hebrews were the Hebrew word means the one who crossed over, the one who came from the other side of the tracks. That's who Abraham was. He was the one who was the non-native. People would have referred to him as the Hebrew, the one who crossed over. The Israelites were born as a community, and as a large community, in Egyptian slavery and bondage. That's when they became a people. The Jewish people is a descendant of those ancient Israelites in a particular landed area called Judea, which is part of Canaan. But that's why those names mean different things in different epochs. The phrase, these sentences in Deuteronomy are there, and they're important in Jewish tradition in two different places. One, this is the oath that every person was supposed to give when they brought their offering to the central worship. Every year, each person who brought their fruits or whatever offerings they had, they were to recite this particular oath. My father was a wandering Aramean. As my father was a refugee, he went down to Egypt. He came back. He had a terrible experience as an exile and as a wanderer in Egypt, but he was freed by God from Egypt with a mighty hand by powers and signs and portents, bringing us to this place. So that was to be said each time you came to the temple in Jerusalem. It's also said at the beginning of the Passover Seder, which is the powerful home-based ritual where each Jewish family and their guests remember that we experienced slavery, we were immigrants, we were oppressed, and it is incumbent upon us in various ways to recognize the heart of the immigrant, the pain and the soul, there are different words that are used, of the person who's in a status of a non-citizen, who's not part of the majority. So you have in front of you 8 different texts, and 8 of the 36. We may look at 1 or 2 of them, but I would want to remind you of the 3 commandments to love that are central also in Jewish scriptures. 2 of them are clearly lifted up in Christian texts. There are 3 commandments in which the word love is used. One is, give me the 2 that Jesus quoted.
Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Love God.
You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, all your soul. And what's the 3rd command to love? No, that's not in the Torah. That's not in the Jewish scriptures. And it's interesting how it came, the version of it, loving your enemy. But let's take that as a 3rd.
Father and mother?
You're supposed to honor and honor, kaved, and in Proverbs you're supposed to have awe, respect, but not to love, not to love. There's a definition for what's honoring also. terms of providing minimal. That you could ask about the difference between honoring and loving. There are two expressions of the, you should have been able to guess this from these texts. You shall love the stranger. You shall love the stranger, the one who is not part of your community. You shall love the immigrant. Not only that, this particular commandment is expressed in two ways. The first two are expressed second person plural, second person singular. You individually shall love the Lord your God. You shall love your neighbor. Your neighbor is like yourself. It's easy to love your neighbor. What about the person who's not like yourself, which is the ger? That's the person that you have a collective responsibility to love. V'ahavtem et ger. You collectively have to love the immigrant, the stranger in your midst. It's not just individually. It's a command for the society. And in various ways here in front of us are the expressions of them. This is only 8 out of 36. You shall not wrong. Now, this is an interesting one too. In Exodus 22, there are two expressions in the same word: lo tilchatz, v'lo tonu. That's why I scribbled a little Hebrew there, because I wanted to check what were the Hebrew. Do not wrong and do not oppress a stranger. Well, what's the difference between wronging and oppressing? So that's why we have Jewish tradition of rabbis to sort of figure out what's conveyed by those two different expressions. And the Talmud says wronging means not providing what they need, not providing health care, not providing housing. I mean, the physical needs. Whereas oppressing is the emotional needs. The treating somebody as different from you. That's oppressing. So that when we even the language we use, illegal immigrants, it's very painful language. It's inappropriate language biblically. People who are undocumented are not illegal. People aren't illegal. They may be undocumented, but people are not illegal. So I think just using that expression, illegal immigrants, is a form of oppressing the stranger. So any of the social safety net that you have there, it looks like I'm running out of time here. The social safety net is mentioned in various times. If you have the obligation, if you own a field, to keep the corners of it for the poor, to leave the forgotten sheaves. If you harvested everything and you forgot some there, the poor and the stranger and the widow, the particular categories that God cares about, those people own actually the corners of your field. There's a portion of what you have that doesn't belong to you. It belongs to those whom God has special concern for, and they're variously listed as the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. And you can see them there, and maybe I'll finish with this and just say a couple words about what's happening in the Jewish community on the issue of Syrian refugees, which is the one that's most pressing as a public policy question. There's a little commentary at the bottom of that page that I handed you. It says in the Passover Haggadah that every family uses in their home, that the key thing to, if you don't do this, you haven't fulfilled your obligation in the Seder. Every person is obligated to see himself or herself as though she came forth from Egypt. Lerot et atzmo is the way you say it in Hebrew. But one of the great commentators, Maimonides, who lived in Egypt in a surrounding Muslim culture in the 12th century, said it should be read laharot et atzmo. You should not just see yourself, but you should show yourself as somebody who understands that they came from a background of being an immigrant and being an unfortunate immigrant, and they know what it's like. And you should act in public in ways that people would understand that you know what it is to be a stranger. So I think that's why it's very easy for me to talk about this subject. It suffuses the Hebrew Bible. There are commandments on almost every page. We identify, in fact, the reason why we are commanded to love the immigrant is because the immigrant is us. We have moved. We have moved in history. And there's almost no one who hasn't had this experience of immigration. All the religions I know about have a story of a journey, of having to move from a land to another land, and we have that in common, East, West, the journey in the sense of it at some point in our lives not being the majority. So the Syrian crisis evokes very painful memories for the Jewish community, because some of the rhetoric, fortunately, all here, and we don't have to hear any more of it tonight when we go home, right? We don't have to watch TV. What is said about Syrian immigrants now by public officials and journalists was said about the Jewish community in the 30s and 40s, even about the children of the, we shouldn't accept, there was the kinder transport, try to rescue children from Nazi Germany. The U.S. closed its doors to them. People in this society said, we don't want any Jewish children. We don't want any Jewish adults because there might be Germans among those adults. The exact same language that's being used to turn away the people who are fleeing the persecution, not the persecutors. So this particular issue has evoked a very strong reaction in the Jewish community. The Jewish community at its best fulfills these texts, and it was part of the sanctuary movement for Central American refugees in the 80s. But this particular issue, I know dozens of rabbis who've spoken to their congregations. Right now, in our country, it's not like Canada, we can't sponsor, 1 minute? Yeah. We can't sponsor refugees. There are other countries that are a little more civilized than ours, but we can advocate that our doors be open for people fleeing persecution, and we can prepare ourselves to the people who get through that 2-year process of vetting, who are very carefully vetted. We can open our doors, and we can let people know that our doors are open, and that should be what every synagogue and every mosque and every gurdwara and every church should be doing in this country. And there is a Jewish organization called HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which is leading the public policy fight in the Jewish community in solidarity with refugees.
Thank you, Gerry. Our next speaker is Dr. Patricia Maloof. She's the Program Director of Migration and Refugee Services for Catholic Charities at the Diocese of Arlington. She was formerly the Director of Development with the Catholic Legal Immigration Network Clinic. Some of you have remember, the largest charitable immigration legal services network in the United States. Dr. Maloof began her work with refugees in the 1980s. You should have put that date in there. She advocates, publishes, and conducts research on barriers to healthcare access and the provision of services to refugees and immigrants. Dr. Maloof is trained as a medical interpreter and is a part-time faculty member of the Department of Anthropology at Catholic University of America in D.C. 3 of her publications can be found online: Muslim Refugees in the United States, Mind, Body, Spirit, Toward a Biopsychosocial Spiritual Model of Health, and a review of the literature, mentoring, and evidence-based strategy to increase diversity among students and faculty from racial and ethnic groups underrepresented in the maternal and child health training program. She has a PhD in medical anthropology from Catholic University of America and a BA and MA in anthropology from George Washington University. Let's welcome Dr. Maloof.
Good evening. Thank you for coming this evening. Thank you to ATFA and the Rumi Forum for holding such a discussion. I think it's very timely and most welcome. And thank you, Rabbi, because you helped to lay the foundation for my part of for the beginning of my presentation. So the discussion for my section today, we will explore the Christian perspective, looking at the biblical foundation, the history of exile that the Rabbi mentioned already, the Holy Family as forced migrants, the whole concept of hospitality, finding Jesus in the stranger, and then go on to discuss some core values that guide our work and how do we put our faith into action. When I first heard about this presentation, my question was, before I saw the second part of the title, who is the stranger? How do we define it? who among us are strangers or have been strangers? How would we want to be treated? Some of the things that I mention later on refugees, I'm sorry if it's a little sensitive topic for some of you, so just bear with me. So you see multiple themes. Some of these have already been mentioned. The whole concept of diaspora, exile, forced migration. Many references to the stranger, the alien, sojourner, foreigner. Lots of discussion around hospitality and welcome, the metaphor of being included at the table, and then compassion for and justice for immigrants. I only put this one slide on the Old Testament. Thank you, because you've covered it already, and I thought you would, but it just helps to transition into mine, about not to oppress the alien. Now, depending upon which Bible you are using, there may be different terms, so you may see foreigner, sojourner, stranger used in different contexts. And then, so that's in Exodus. Leviticus also has it about not to ill-treat foreigners. Remember that you yourselves were also foreigners in the land of Egypt. So I'm not going to spend any more time on the Old Testament, and I'm going to move into the New Testament and look at some of the Gospels and what they are saying. And you see clearly in the Gospels an emphasis on the Holy Family as forced migrants, and even on Jesus as a refugee. And there's the story in Matthew 2 where he's recounting how an angel appeared and told Joseph that King Herod was coming to kill all newborn children and in an effort to kill Christ and to pick up and leave and to flee, and they did. And then you find other references of seeing Jesus in the stranger. There was the question, when did I help you? When did I do anything for you? And it was, well, when I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. So it's this whole concept that by helping the stranger, we are seeing Christ in the stranger. You also have the identification of Jesus with the dispossessed and the poor. And again, where foxes have holes, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lie down and rest. Again, clearly illustrative of what happens oftentimes to people who are refugees or displaced. And a few more, not in the Gospel, but not in the Gospels, but in the New Testament, from the Hebrews, about welcoming strangers into your homes. And you may be welcoming angels without knowing it. And there's, of course, this story about Abraham doing the same thing in the Old Testament. And then to share your belongings with the needy fellow Christians, to open your homes to strangers. So, as an anthropologist, I do applied work. And so I decided what I would do is show how does all of this get acted upon in our daily lives. And so we'll talk about briefly refugee resettlement as a ministry. Now, when you think about the term ministry, it can take many forms of service. And the idea, however, is that it's not just work in general. It should have some benefit to others. You may be giving food, clothing, financial assistance, meeting other needs. I'm going to talk about ministry, refugee resettlement ministry, as it relates specifically to refugees. That's redundant, sorry. But anyway, there also is, I wanted to mention this one, about when it comes to action. Should not just be words and talk, but must be true love which shows itself in action. So you hear the expression, for example, living the gospel, or proclaiming the good news using words only when necessary. It's not enough to just pray it or think it. What one must do is act on it. And some of the core values that guide our work as part of, in Catholic Charities, my particular agency, and also Christian organizations in general include welcome and hospitality, dignity and respect for the human person, where life is sacred, every person is precious, working for the common good. And the common good is not just what somebody wants. The common good is what social conditions make it possible for every individual person to be all that they can be, whether it's education, drinking water, freedom, all kinds of things. What goes into that common good? The option for the poor and vulnerable, in that societies are judged by how do they treat the most vulnerable, and that and to put the needs of the poor and vulnerable first. And then solidarity is that we view others as our brothers and sisters, and that we stand in solidarity with them and in their oppression. I wanted to say one more thing about hospitality, and that is this welcoming and hospitality is an obligation and a responsibility, and nothing is expected in return. It's given out of love because of God's love, and it's meant in historic times to transcend social differences. It crossed social boundaries, and the same still exists today. I'm going to now move into looking at refugee resettlement. There's something that we need to clarify first, and thank you, Sandy, for your statistics on immigrants. I want to say that we have lots of foreign-born in this area, and there are people who are here on a permanent basis, others who are here temporarily. Maybe they're tourists or students or business people and so on. However, when we look at immigrants in general, they have choice. They want to be here, they have time to prepare, they can go back and forth. It's different from refugees. Refugees are fleeing persecution. They have no choice to be here. They have limited choice about their country of resettlement, and they cannot return home. And I was really struck by recently, during Christmas time, when someone was recounting how she was a refugee, how her friends at work, her coworkers, were talking about, oh, over the vacation, I'm going to go home. And she was saying, and I could not go home. And that was something that really was striking to her. So just to give you some idea of the scale, there are 60 million people who are uprooted in the world today, a phenomenal number, the most it's ever been. 20 million of these are refugees. So we're looking at 1 in every 122 people worldwide. And in some countries, of course, it's maybe 1 out of every 4, or 1 out of every 50. But worldwide, 1 out of 122. And sadly, 52% of the world's displaced are under 18. So we are looking at children who do not have much of a future at the moment. Wait 1 second. There we go. So, I'm going to explain the narrow definition of refugee so you can understand the importance of it with what else we do. By definition, a refugee has crossed an international border, and there are some exceptions to that, but it's not important for tonight's discussion. And they have a well-founded fear of persecution based on 5 protected grounds. And those 5 protected grounds are there: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a social group. Significant for tonight is that there are 9 national organizations that work with the government in a public-private partnership to provide refugee resettlement in the U.S. 2 of them are secular: International Rescue Committee and U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. One is an ethnic-based community, Ethiopian Community Development Council. So significantly, out of these 9, 6 are faith-based. One is HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which the Rabbi mentioned already. The others are Church World Service. This is a cooperative ministry of about 37 Christian denominations with the National Council of Churches. Episcopal Migration Ministries, Hebrew Immigrant Aid, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, and actually there's someone here tonight, Razan, you might just want to raise your hand, our sister agency here in Northern Virginia. U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, that's my national office, and World Relief, which is the humanitarian arm of the National Association of Evangelicals. So in Northern Virginia here, we have 2 organizations that are conducting refugee resettlement, the Catholics and the Lutherans. Our role, very quickly, is self-sufficiency through early employment and integration into their local communities. We provide comprehensive resettlement services upon arrival of newcomers. There is no proselytizing, and I even tell refugees when we do a group cultural orientation, we're called Catholic Charities, but that's okay, don't worry about it. We're not trying to convert anybody, and we receive all races, nationalities, and creeds. Quickly, I wanted to show you our leadership, whether it's religious or CEOs and others, all issue statements, work at advocacy to support resettlement. So here is one from Church World Service, where they talk about radical forgiveness and radical welcome based on a relationship with God that empowers us to be vulnerable, take risks, and welcome the other. Episcopal Migration Ministries, here you have their presiding bishop reminding people about to care for the widow and orphan and sojourners because they were also refugees and homeless. Here is Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, again speaking about the ministry of service and justice, standing for and advocating for migrants and refugees. And this is, and I meant to show you, sorry, oh, that's right. Bless you. Here you see the theme of Mary on the donkey. Again, this whole idea of movement. Oh, that's the wrong one. Again, for the Catholics, you see again the Holy Family, this whole idea of migration and exile. And here, remember I mentioned about earlier, identification of Christ with the stranger. So welcomed by the disciple as if he or she were Christ himself. And luckily we have, as a Catholic Church, we are lucky with have papal teachings. This came out early in the 50s, just after the war, talking about the Holy Family being the archetype of every refugee family. Pope John Paul II reminding people not to close the door to foreigners. Significantly, Pope Francis's first speech outside the Vatican was on Lampedusa, and it was on migration. And those of us in this field were really excited about it because it was a very big justification for us and the work we do. And
said something about a wall last week, too.
yes, he did.
Bridges and walls.
And again, the identification of Christ with refugees, the flesh of Christ, that is the flesh of the refugees. I think that's it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maloof. Our last speaker, we're proud to have the opportunity to present Professor Naseem Rizvi, who has numerous years of experience in the field of international affairs as well as in the nonprofit sector. Professor Rizvi obtained her master's degree in international affairs at the Quid University in Islamabad, Pakistan. She has worked as an adjunct instructor at the University of Loyola in Chicago, where she taught several classes in U.S. Afghanistan Foreign Policy, as well as human rights and international affairs in Asia. She also served as a panelist speaking about Islam and women's issues. Professor Rizvi then became a case manager and a program coordinator at the Council of People's Organizations in Brooklyn, New York, to assist diverse communities in health, employment, education, and legal issues. From 2008 to 2014, she worked in the Open Society Foundations and conducted extensive research and produced papers on international funding trends. Professor Rizvi.
Does it work?
I don't think so.
Thank you. Good evening. So before we begin, thank you so much for coming. Before we begin, I would like to read a very brief statement this is the Arabic statement about the strangers. And it says the stranger is blind, even if he has eyes, which indicates the vulnerability of stranger and suggests that the stranger needs help and guidance. Tonight we are here to talk about welcoming the strangers, those strangers who are immigrants and refugees. And I think this is perhaps the very right time and a timely topic that there are echoes which are not so welcoming towards these immigrants and strangers. And they come from different quarters and different parts of the world, including the election debates in the United States. So we are making our case to welcome them in the light of religious perspectives of three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and which I consider that these are the cousin religions as they originated in the same motherland with the same ancestry of one grandfather, Abraham. And amongst other countless commonalities of these religions, asylum and refuge is another commonality that represents act of love and help to needy people. Because all three founders of these religions, Moses, Jesus Christ, and Muhammad, experienced exile and sought asylum in foreign communities at some point of their lives. So to begin with the Islamic perspective on welcoming the immigrants and refugees, Islam strongly advocates for welcoming the immigrants and refugees, and it does not only give policies and mechanism in terms of their rights, but also provides models for refugee protection and integration into the society where they have sought refuge. The policies and mechanism are clearly revealed in the Islamic immigration hijrah law, which is based on Quran and Hadith, and these are the main sources of the hijrah law. Hijrah is an Arabic word that means to abandon and to leave the place. And for the model, we can refer to two major migrations that took place in the Prophet's life, and they established the models for the protection and integration of immigrants, refugees at a new place. Immigration and refuge in Islam is linked with the obligation to search for security and protection. The Quran speaks of oppressed and weak people on earth and suggests that they could migrate from their oppressed positions to another land of God. And the verse says, "Was not the earth of God spacious enough for you to flee for refuge?" This is Surah Nisa, Surah in Quran, chapter 4 and verse 97. At the same time, Islam requires believers to assist and protect vulnerable people and praise them. And by saying, this is also another verse, those who forsook their homes and to those who gave them aid and those who followed them, well pleased Allah be with them. Surah 9, Repentance. So we can speak volumes about the Islamic teachings regarding the immigrants and refugees, but I would highlight only those laws and policies that are distinct in nature.
First is it's very interesting to note that in comparison to the modern refugee law, Hijra offers a broader definition of refugee and gives individuals rather than states the right to seek, right to the determination of asylum. While in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights gives every human being the right to seek and enjoy asylum from persecution in their country of origin, it does not obligate states to grant asylum to refugees. Thus, individuals not only have to have the right to seek and to be granted asylum in any Muslim state, but it is the duty of Muslims to accept and protect these refugees for as long as they seek protection. So according to Islamic migration hijrah law, individuals have the right both to seek and to be granted asylum and refuge. The second policy which I would like to highlight, this is the inclusiveness. In Islam, asylum is right of anyone seeking protection. Islam embraces people of different races, nationalities, and ethnicities, and relieving suffering and assisting sheltering and granting safety to the needy. Even enemies are an integral part of the Islamic Sharia. So Aman or Aman is the word that Aman means the protection and in refuge, that refers to the refuge and safeguard offered to the non-Muslims even if they are in conflict with the Muslims, and requires that host population facilitate the voluntary return to the refugees to their places of origin when they considered safe. Holy Quran speaks explicitly about the issues of asylum seekers and refugees inclusive, and if any one of the disbelievers seeks your protection, then grant him protection so that he may hear the word of Allah and then escort him to where he will be secure. Surah 9. The third policy that I was thinking to mention was the children and women to be dealt with affirmative action. The Muslim Prophet reiterated the rights of women and children more than any other groups. Refugee children and women are among the most deprived people in the world, and Muslims should allocate part of their charitable efforts to their support. From a religious perspective, what is offered to these individuals is their by right. It's 70-24. And then the fourth was the equal rights for refugees and immigrants. Following the Prophet's declaration of brotherhood among the Muhajirin and Ansar, and his statement, the rights of migrants are the same as those of their hosts. Women and children, refugees, are given the same rights as the women and children of the host society. These include the right to remain with their family or to be reunited with them, as well as to be treated well at all times. The Islamic laws on refugees remain a significant source of protection for rights of refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers. Now, these were the four policies that I was thinking to mention regarding what Islamic Sharia says about, because we can go on and on, but the most important are the ones that the first policy that I mentioned was that struck me was the right to the individual rather than the state. That is very important, and the inclusiveness, which usually I think we do not come across as often. For the model, there have been two migrations in the history in the Prophet's time. One was to the Abyssinia, when 80 followers of the Prophet, they went to Abyssinia and they sought refuge in the Christian kingdom, and King Negus was very generous to offer them. So this was the first interaction between the Christians and Muslims for the refugees and for the immigration purposes, and that became very, that became a model that wherever you want to sought refuge, you can go, and they were accommodated. So these two religions, they were not, in conflict with each other for the refuge purposes. The second is more important in terms of the model when Prophet Muhammad migrated from Mecca to Medina, and he had established the Charter of Medina, which was to establish an integrated society where because when he migrated, the people who left with him, they were weak, they had left all their belongings to their home, and they couldn't bring anything with them. So they were very poor, and they were... So Muhammad had asked, the tradition says that his wisdom worked like that he had allocated Ansars, the supporters, and the Muhajireens, the refugees. They came, and then he instructed them that they should take them as the family members, one Ansar, one Muhajir, and then they helped them and they established them, and that's how they got integrated into the system and at a new place. I'm running short of time. I would like to mention that in the contemporary world, Pakistan has been hosting the refugees, 1.6 million refugees until 2013. This is the statistics that came along, and Pakistan's role has been lauded in the world. Similarly, Iran, the two Islamic countries have been hosting the Afghan refugees. The largest refugees influx was in Pakistan, and now they are almost like the citizens. They got married with local women, they have businesses established and all that. So Pakistan is playing the role of the host for many. So in conclusion, what I would like to say is that the practice of the Prophet with regard to immigrants is, in the early history of Islam, can be taken as an example for our modern day approach to migration and immigrants. The teaching of Islam has very important foundations for providing mutual help among immigrants and citizens. And the concept of Islam, asylum in Islam, is not very different from the notion of sanctuary found in the other two monotheistic religions. The Islamic concept of hijrah, migration, forced migration, and muhajirun are taken from both the Judaic and Christian laws regarding sojourners and aliens, and from the pre-Islamic traditions of hospitality and reception. The consensus of three religions provide a solid base to welcome their strangers and refugees among ourselves. We all have the consensus, and we would definitely like to build a solid base to welcome them. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We have a few minutes for some questions, and I'm going to pass the microphone, and then we have all three speakers. You can address them too.
Thanks very much. I'm Tom Switzer, a retired State Department Foreign Service officer. I've served in 6 regions of the world, several of which you have made reference here. Thanks and congratulations to all three of you for laying out a very interesting tapestry with different facets, complexities, and values in this. My question is this: since sociologists keep informing us that young people begin to form their values and their belief systems at a very young age, certainly well into grade school and through high school, I guess my question is, what have educational your organizations, pro-immigrant, pro-refugee organizations, been able to do so far in promoting or placing courses into any school systems around the country? And for that matter, are there substantial possibilities of doing more on this, since I don't know? Thank you.
there's a microphone. Here, this one. Don't worry. With Gerry. Here it is. Here we go.
I think we're working at the Interfaith Conference directly actually with the DC Public Schools. We've just started working with them on the teaching of difference and pluralism. I mean, the immediate event was the Islamophobia that's so much around us. So they asked us for, not so that they want to teach comparative religion, but how can we, throughout the grade levels, teach, in effect, pluralism and acceptance of difference. And that's really the key issue for young people, I think, to teach something way beyond tolerance. Tolerance is, we tolerate you being in the room with us, but we hate your guts. We need to be teaching pluralism, and we need to be modeling it as we are doing tonight in this panel, and religious leaders should be modeling it more with cooperation. All those refugee organizations work together, right and left. They're among the best examples of active pluralism that exist in the society. But there's a tremendous need to counteract that xenophobia that gets stirred up every so often in American culture. We have wonderful values that are not put in, that recede sometimes in parts of our history. We're in an era like the 1840s and 1850s, the Know Nothing Party, which rejected Catholics as a foreign implant, not a religion, not an authentic religion. They're papists, and they shouldn't be allowed to immigrate here. So this is a pattern sadly in our country to take a look at a particular class of, in this case, religious groups. Now it's Muslims, but it has been Jews and it has been Catholics. In the past, the Pilgrims themselves weren't great pluralists, even though they were escaping religious persecution. So, but I think the IFC is working on that issue from the point of view of teaching difference in the public schools.
Thank you.
I have a question for Dr. Maloof. Because there is so much anti-immigrant and anti-refugee rhetoric today coming from people who are stating publicly this stems from their deep Christian beliefs and their deep Christian actions. And I am baffled that more Christian leaders and institutions have not come forward based on what you just said. That's not Christian teaching. Why has there not been more overt statement that people who act as Christians don't act this way? And when the Pope said something, no one backed him up. Perhaps it was because it was connected to an individual, and theoretically religions aren't supposed to get involved in politics, which we know is not true. It doesn't happen here. But I would like to know why you think that more Christian groups are not coming forward and saying, this is not Christian. This is not the way Christians act.
I don't know. I wish I had the answer to that. It would make life much easier. Everyone is going to hold their own personal opinions and interpret religion in their own way. I do think, though, when you see this strong representation of 5 Christian groups coming together for refugee resettlement, it's been something that we've been doing anywhere from 50 to 70 years, not getting a lot of attention, but just working away and bringing in 3 million people over the last 50 years. So I'm not certain, how do you change the hearts of people who do not agree? I think some are giving in to fear. Some are very misinformed. They really do not understand what has happened, what people have been through, what they have experienced, why they are coming. They do not understand the process and the vetting that goes through before anyone comes. It's not like you just decide, oh, I want to be in the United States and I'm going to run across the border and take a boat into Greece. I mean, it doesn't it doesn't work that way, and I think people just do not understand the underlying reasons for all this movement. And it unfortunately lends itself to negative political rhetoric, and that's what's, I think, derailed much of this.
Earl Zimmerman, a pastor of Northern Virginia Mennonite Church here in the community, and I guess that's for anybody here. But my question is, when will we be able to sponsor and resettle Syrian refugees in our community? Are we getting close? Or, you know,
I guess I should answer that. Right now, there are not many coming in. We had one case in one family in 2014. We do not have any scheduled to come. I don't know, Razan, if you're seeing any in your caseload yet, but it's taking at least 24 months or more for all of the vetting, security, background checks, everything to go through. Somehow Canada managed to just bring in 25,000 Syrian refugees in 5 months. Their system works differently than ours. We interview the UN may refer refugees or does refer refugees to the US. However, we interview each family before they are allowed to enter. And that along with the security backgrounds take quite a while. So, the whole idea will be they will resettle mostly where they have family members first. If anyone has a family member or a friend, they would go there first. We have a Syrian community here, not as large as other parts of the US. So I'm not seeing any right away. We'll see how long it takes.
And I might add, both Ms. Osman and Dr. Maloof are going to be speaking at the Faith Communities in Action meeting on March the 9th. So if you want to know more about refugee resettlement here in Northern Virginia and what that process is, and I encourage you to come to that as well. Thank you. We are going to, if it's okay, we're going to take about 5 more minutes. We're going to go a little bit over time unless you have some objections or questions. Okay. Do we have another question? Well, we don't. Oh, well, excuse me.
One question. There's been controversy precisely in this time of refugees from the Syrian area. What is, to our Muslim participant from the Muslim perspective, dealing with the tradition of refugees in Islam, dealing with this controversy of why then are not the countries in the region then taking in these refugees first and foremost? That is a question that's very true.
That's the question I don't have answer for that, but I think basically the political reasons that are shaping the region at the moment, the wars and the ideological rift between the two schools of thought of Shias and Sunni Islam, which was basically established after Prophet left. And I think they do not adhere to Quran as much as they should be, because the personification of Quran would be like, yes, and they should be the prime states to welcome the refugees. Instead, I mean, they're coming to Canada or wherever. And I agree with you that it's very embarrassing for me to, I have no answer and I cannot say how to defend that. But I have tried to explain it because of these two, the logical rift between the Shias and Sunnis.
I think Gerry wanted to also, and then we'll go to you, Dr.
Well, also to be fair, there are hundreds of thousands of refugees in Jordan and in Turkey.
And Lebanon.
And Lebanon. Those societies are doing the best they can. We're the ones, and some parts of Europe have been welcoming. It's this country in particular where the Obama administration tried to go from 10,000 to 20,000 or some theoretical number which wouldn't make that much difference, but it would at least symbolically say that we're open, and the Congress turned him down flat. But I do think, as Pastor Zimmerman I mean, I think that is something we can do. Even if we can't welcome a family now, we can advocate. That's what I understand. And we can say that we are radically welcoming. And we want in our community in Northern Virginia and Montgomery County, which had a meeting in Montgomery County, Maryland, on this theme recently, that we welcome this community. We would like to have those people, and we advocate publicly that this country should be open to refugees fleeing from, it's not just Syria, it's Iraq as well, from the Middle East, who we know are primarily, or not exclusively, Muslim. But we've got, because we're fighting this battle, that there are people fighting on the other side. We'll let people from that area out if they're Christians. That's what some of the politicians have said recently. And the religious community, and not just the Muslim community, and really not primarily the Muslim community, should be fighting back publicly, and should be. And it's not a question of fighting; it's a question of reading our Bibles and reading our Qurans and reading our Gitas, because that's what's in every one of those traditions.
You're right, Gerry. Just in my work, I have houses of worship of all different faiths calling and wanting to know about when can we sign up to adopt or help the Syrian refugees as well as other refugees. And so we are hearing that from the faith community. It's just not being publicized. Imam Sazim.
I think the biggest country who has taken largest amount of people is Turkey. And they continue to receive them, and they have not rejected anybody so far. But if you look at the area, that the war waging all over the Middle East. Yemen was not having in war, also Yemen is affected by that. The most refugees who are leaving Syria, for example, they do not want to go into the Middle Eastern countries. They want to move to Europe because they see there's a safety there. And because of the previous wars, like in Iraq and Afghanistan, and also the issues in Palestine and Syria, Palestine and Israel, they are already exhausted their resources of welcoming refugees from all these areas. For example, Pakistan, the case mentioned, has over millions of refugees came from Afghanistan, and they're already being adjusted in the communities, married, have businesses, and everything, and still they are welcoming more refugees coming elsewhere. For example, Nepal, and also northern area from eastern Turkestan, which is now part of China, they're coming from there. So they're taking it. But also understand that besides Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, the oil sheikdoms, all the other countries are very, very poor. Their resources are very, very limited. So, but they're still taking a lot more refugees than we have done so far.